Welcome to this video on object-oriented programming and looking today at creating a library management system using classes. In this lesson, you will look at making a system with two different classes and how they tie together. We're going to look at the layers of abstraction and redefining and recapping on that term. What exactly is abstraction? And this time round, our main menu is going to have a fully working implementation so we can actually see how classes work in practice. Now, first things first, let's think about what a library is. Now, this is a picture on the screen of the Bodleian Library, which is in Oxford. And this is an absolutely amazing library. It's one of the largest and oldest libraries in Europe, and it has probably 12 million items in it. Now, an interesting thing, coming back to this thing of abstraction, is when you're creating a system, when you're coding, you have to abstract, which means you've got to cut out all the irrelevant details. And one of the first questions you've got to ask yourself is, what exactly do I need from this system? What is happening in this system? What's the data which is coming in and out? What are the attributes I really need to put in, and what are the methods? In this case, we're going to look at a library not quite so grand as the Bodleian, maybe, which lends books, which adds books. Obviously, an attribute is going to be the available books that it has in it. We're going to have another class, which is going to be the student class, and a student has certain methods. In this case, we're just going to keep it simple. A student can request a book and return a book. So that's one of the first questions you'd ask. When you're creating something for a library, for a bank, whatever it might be, how can we abstract? What attributes and methods do we need? So coming back to that definition, abstraction is the concept of looking at the required essential characteristics with respect to a particular context. Having carried out some abstraction on our problem, we're going to be making a little library with 3 books. Hopefully most libraries have more than that, and we're going to look at this lovely little library with one of my favourite authors, C.S. Lewis. And for purposes of testing, this library is going to have 3 books, these particular 3 books, and it would look something like this. So once we've actually implemented it, it would have a little menu system where you display all the available books. These are the books we have in the library: Lost Battle, The Screwtape Letters, The Great Divorce. There would be the option, if the user put in the option 1, to take out a book. So in this case, The Last Battle has been taken out by a student. And then if you display all the books again, you can see that The Last Battle has indeed been taken out. So let's have a look at how we might implement this library management system with classes. First things first, we are going to create 2 classes. One is going to be called library, and one is going to be student. Within the library class, we're going to have our def init function, and let's have the available books stored as a list of books. And remember, the init method is the first method to be invoked when you create an object. So we've got our available books as an attribute there, and it's going to be a list of books. As we mentioned, what sort of methods are we going to look at? Now, in a library, we might have the requirement to show the available books. So let's have a little method which does that. Simply printing the books we have. And then it would print for book in self available books, keeping in mind that that is going to be a list book. We could have additional methods such as lend book. So that's going to have you always have the self parameter. Requested book, Now this is interesting. This particular parameter, where is it coming from? That's something we're going to look at in a minute. So if the requested book is indeed in the self-available books, which is our list of books, print, yep, it's there, or you have now borrowed it. Else, print, sorry, it's not in stock or in the library. You could also have a little function which says add book. That is in the code which is provided for you. Now, before we do anything else, let's go down a little bit and have a look at what we might put in the student class. Now, I'm going to skip all the attributes and the formalities there. We're just going to have a little method called request book. So we might have something like enter the name of the book you would like to check out. Self.book. And we're going to actually ask for some user input here and return the book. So this method actually asks the user for a book, it returns the book that they put in to the system so that we can use it. And you'll see how that works in a minute. We can also have a return book in exactly the same way. Self.book and return self.book. Now the question is, how do we actually get this entire library system working? So at the moment we've just defined two different classes, we haven't created any instances, nothing actually exists in reality. So I'm going to create, now there's a proper way of doing this where you might have a init main. For simplicity, I'm just going to have a simple main function there. Call it there. And let us, within this main function, create an object called library. And remember, the library class is asking for a parameter called list of books, which is going to be an actual list. So when we actually create an object, create an instance of the library class, we have to actually call it with our books, like so. Feel free to use your favorite books or author. So we've created a little list. We also need to create a student object, which is created from the student class. So we've created two objects now. One is library and one is student, and they're both based on the actual classes. You can create an entire menu system at this point, which I have pre-prepared. And you can see that if the user puts in a choice 1, it is calling, it's using the object library that we've just created, and it's calling the method display available books, which is here. So that will simply print the available books. If they decide to do something slightly more complex, such as lend book, it calls the method student request book, which we created over here. Student return book. Now you remember this particular one, which said if requested book is in self-available books, you have borrowed it. And you'll notice that this is actually referring, lend book is taking in a parameter which is coming from the student class, or one of the methods in the student class. So if we run this code, You might find that you need to troubleshoot, which is always good practice. You have a library menu. It displays the books that you have. You could request a book. You have now borrowed it, and then you could display the available books. And so on. And this implementation that we've shown, it's not complete, but you can use the code that has been provided for a complete implementation of this program. Scroll down and feel free to pause as you're going through it yourself. What we've looked at is how to create a library management system using two different classes, and as you play around with the code that we've provided, you will see how the parameters actually interact with one another, and how it's very useful to actually be able to abstract, which is one of the key pillars of object-oriented programming. In the next video, we're going to be looking at more and additional features and pillars of object-oriented programming, such as inheritance and encapsulation, and finally polymorphism.